Welcome to our Buckeye podcast, where we will be discussing relevant topics in the field of organ donation and transplantation. Hello, I'm Jeff Arrington, President and CEO at Buckeye Transplant Services. We have some great guests on our show today. We have Nadine Kalpakidis. Nadine is an organ procurement transplant coordinator who currently works at Life Connection of Ohio. We also have Jason Smigowski, who currently works at the OPO in Indiana, the Indiana Donor Network. Both coordinators come with a unique perspective, seeing how they work at the OPO and have also spent some time working with us here at Buckeye. We are also joined by our very own Stephanie Wood. Stephanie is the VP of Clinical Operations here at Buckeye. We will be hearing from our guests on how they found their way into a career in the field of organ donation and transplantation. We'll also be discussing some issues like work-life balance, and we'll be talking about how working at Buckeye has changed Nadine and Jason's approach to their current job as an OPO procurement coordinator. All this and more coming up next. This podcast is brought to you by ourselves, Buckeye Transplant Services. For more information about us, please visit our website, buckeyetransplant.com, or you can reach out to us via our email at contactus@buckeyetransplant.com. All right, so we're just going to go through some of the topics here. We thought that this would be a good topic, seeing how Jason and Nadine have both been Buckeye coordinators. Might just give a good perspective on kind of understanding both sides, because I think a lot of OPO, we have a handful of OPO coordinators that moonlight on the weekends, and there just seems to be kind of an eye-opening moment, or some obviously Buckeyes, I think 90% of our coordinators are all ex-OPO coordinators, so we kind of get a good feel of that. So we thought this topic might help explore that side of things. So I guess the first, we'll just get into the discussion. I think everybody kind of has a story on how they got into the field of organ donation. And, my story was, I was a registered nurse, or still am a registered nurse, but, back in the day, worked in a small county hospital at Wood County Hospital in Bowling Green, and worked on a potential donor case. I did everything completely wrong. I, approached the family early. I told them I was making the referral, and just got to know some of the folks that way. And about 3 weeks later, I was working down in the ER and in the triage, and Mark Tudor, who is one of the administrators at LifeNet in Virginia, came in. His son had fallen off a bar stool and needed stitches. So because of that conversation, ended up with me applying for a job at Life Connection of Ohio, and that's kind of how I got into the field. So I guess, Jason, I'll start with you. Do you have a story on how you found your way into the field of donation?
Yeah, I think my story is not like yours. I was working as an LPN, working my way into getting my RN, and I got a phone call one day, or I think it was a text message actually, from somebody who I did not talk to very often, and it's still to this day probably, and don't talk to all that often. But they just randomly told me, hey, I met this person today that did this job, and for whatever reason, I thought of you, and I thought maybe you should apply there.
No, that was a Life Connection, right?
It sure was. So that first phone call that I got was from Jeff Arrington, inviting me in for an interview. And I believe I sat down with you, and we talked about a lot of stuff. And a few months later, the next thing you know, there I am, sitting in a chair at Life Connection. And 12 years later, I'm sitting here on a podcast with you.
Nadine, tell us your story.
So how I got into donation was I was at Lourdes finishing up my undergrad and looking for the elusive 1-year master's program to bridge between undergrad and med school. So I didn't quite score as high as I wanted to get into the med school And I was going to take a year to study and try again. And so I'm discussing with some of my professors who were saying, I know this program at UT, and I think you would be really interested in it. So I went and talked to Linda Miller, and I applied that day. And I kind of just fell in love with it from that moment. I think I knew since I was probably about 5 or 6 years old that I would work in medicine in some area close to death. My aunt was actually an overdose, and my parents brought me to the ICU, and I couldn't, of course, go in because I was, 5 or 6 years old, and I was sitting at the nurse's station. And so I think like always like death was something I was exposed to when I was so young that it just felt like a time that that people were so vulnerable that I wanted to be a part of that time for them. And I kind of just went from there.
Yeah, and that's great. And one of the things, too, that you touched on, I think people that come into the transplant world, I think right away if this job's for you. When I graduated nursing school and got a job working second, third shift, I hated clocking in and out. I don't know why. I just hated the aspect of getting somewhere, clocking in, and being somewhere for 8 hours, 12 hours. And when I went to the OPO, I think I went from working 36 to 40 hours a week to 60 to 70 hours a week, but it didn't feel like it, even from that first week, 2 weeks, I knew, okay, yeah, this job, fits my personality. And I knew right from the beginning that this was the job for me. Jason, do you have that at all? I mean, when you started working in this field, I mean, was it kind of because it's not, yeah, I would venture to say, Nadine, I don't know how long you've been in the field. How long have you been in the field?
Just a short 5 years.
5 years. I'm coming up here on 20 years. And Jason, I don't know about you.
Yeah, 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely. I vividly remember that day, that first day when you gave me like an assignment to go out and take care of the company car, and you looked at me and said, "It's a different kind of job, Jason." And I knew, and like you said, I still to this day loathe that clocking in. I like to feel that I'm in control of my destiny somewhat, that every day when I wake up, and that's what this job really provides for me.
So, Stephanie, you're also from the HDS program. How did you find your way into this role?
I was actually in the PA program at the University of Toledo Medical Center. So I was in the PA program, and it was very competitive, and I didn't really want to keep prolonging school. I wanted to get somewhere, wanted to continue my career in the medical field, and I also owned a bar at the time. So I was really busy with that, and PA school is very demanding, but my bar restaurant was very important to me. And Linda Miller actually came into my bar, and and she actually said, "Oh, you look very familiar." And I said, "Oh, I think that you teach in a class across the hall from the PA program." And she said, "Oh, I do. Yeah, you're in the PA program. You should, come on over to my program." And I did. I switched. I finished all of my academics. I didn't go through with my my internships or my what they call a fellowship there, but I didn't continue on with that. But I ended up switching over and finished the HDS program finished my master's, and then went out to WRTC out in Washington, D.C. and worked for quite a few years, and then came over to Michigan. All the while I've been at Buckeye.
And being, Jason, I think you said, what, 12 years you've been in the field. I've been in the field for 20, and 18, 5. And I don't know what the average is, but it seems that the field of donation and transplantation has a pretty high burnout rate, and I don't know, it'd be something to look into is the average lifespan of a coordinator. But I think pretty early on how to balance that work life approach to the job. So Nadine, I know you have a family. Jason, you have a family. We all have families. So, Nadine, how do you balance that, or what has been your approach to find that healthy work-life balance?
So I think that I was pretty lucky when I came in that a lot of the OPO world had realized that coordinators were getting burned out. I heard, and I don't know how accurate this is, that the average lifespan of a coordinator is 2 years. So I don't know how accurate that is, but I know there's a lot of burnout, and I think that I was lucky enough to start somewhere. I started at Gift of Life in the call center, and I was lucky enough to start somewhere where no matter what was going on, when my shift was over, someone was there to take it from me. So I was able to establish those boundaries that this is what is expected of me and this is what I'm going to do, and still able that when it wasn't too much, I could go like above and beyond. And then when I came into Life Connection, they were really careful to make sure we maintained a work-life balance. Our upper management checks on us at least once a week to make sure that we're getting everything we need, that we're not overworked. And then just like personally, I try to, and this doesn't always happen, I try to leave my work at work and come home. I think working in the OPO field, you realize how fragile life is and how just to be present in the moment when you're not at work. So I just leave that at work so that I can give my best work at work and I can give my best, mom at home when I'm not there. So just creating a boundary and trying to stick with it, and then having the support from other people in the world, in the OPO world. Like I know a lot of the coordinators that I came up with, they had families, and I would just ask them like, how do you do it? And there was a lot of sometimes work wins, sometimes family wins. Try to make sure family wins more than work wins.
Yeah, that's a good point about, kind of, putting things, kind of putting things in a not bringing work home with you. And, some of the, we've seen a lot of coordinators come and go, and, we see some, pretty devastating things in our work. And when, you're training somebody, you're with somebody, you're like, man, how can you just go home and not let this bother you the rest of the weekend? And it's like, yeah, I don't know, but yeah, something you have to learn to do in order to, keep going and find that healthy balance. Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
But nothing to add. I think that I am the opposite of Nadine in that I don't ever shut it off. I live it, throughout my day. I think I've just found a good way to compartmentalize it in my mind. I don't get too worked up about things anymore.
Jason, you get worked up about everything.
And I agree with you. I think that if you were with me on a daily basis, you probably think maybe a little bit differently now. I'm not so bad. But I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I'm just extremely passionate about what I do, and I don't think it's necessarily just from a mission standpoint, which is obviously huge and important. But I just enjoy the job. I enjoy the science. I enjoy the fact that I am able to just continue to go down this rabbit hole of knowledge and make myself better and better and better. And for me, that trumps a lot of the negativity that comes around it. Everything in life is a give and take, right?
Yeah, and that's a big thing. If you can find what you do, if you can find a career that you enjoy doing, then you never have to work a day in your life. And since since I found donation in this field, I just knew from the first day, I knew that I would be in this as long as I could possibly do it. Stephanie, you're a single mother. How do you approach, or how have you and approach that work-life balance?
Yeah, so I would say being a single mom and working for the OPO was extremely difficult. At that time, we would work. We would start a case and stay on the case until it ended. So I would sometimes be away from the kids for a couple days at a time, and that was very difficult. I did employ a very good babysitter that lived with me, so I really feel like that was the only way that I could do it, because I am a single mom. um but now with Buckeye, I mean, I work strictly from home with with traveling, and just as you said, Jeff, I mean, I don't really work every day because it's just part of my everyday life. So my kids are integrated to, what's going on, organ offers, my phone ringing, or reviewing offers. I would be the first to say that I think that this field in general is difficult, but the OPO job is very difficult. It's very difficult to be in a hospital for sometimes 24 plus hours and away. It's difficult approaching families. It's stressful dealing with that type of medicine every single day. Um, but it's very rewarding. I loved my job at the OPO. I love working in donation. I love working in transplantation, but the OPO job is just a very difficult one. And really, for my purposes at that time as a single mom, it eventually got to the point where my kids were getting older, involved in sports or involved in needing other things with school. And I just didn't want to depend on somebody else taking them to and from school every day, and me being gone.
Yeah, and Jason, since you've been in the field, I know you've worked at a few OPOs. I think you've also been a traveler, um, and I believe when you joined Life Connection early on, the approach was that the OPO coordinator did everything. We did the initial referrals, we approached families, we managed the donor, all the way up through the OR, perfusing, pumping kidneys. But I think a lot of that too has been broken down. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most OPOs now have compartmentalized most of the processes through donation. I think a lot of that has come from just sheer volume. Every OPO is doing way more donors than what they were even doing 10 years ago. They found that, one person can't wear that many hats and do it well. So in my experience, what I've seen is that most places are learning from that. We were just having a conversation with one of the other coordinators that had been in this a while, and we were talking about how the cowboy coordinator no longer exists, that we are a dying breed. And while I totally agree with it and think it was the right move, that I think that element, that doing the entire process from the beginning to the very end, was very beneficial for me and my learning, and I still use a lot of those tools today. But yes, I circling back, um, I think that the OPO world and donor management in general, um, has helped itself by compartmentalizing.
All right, well, let's get into our third item. And Nadine and Jason, you guys were both here at Buckeye as a coordinator. Nadine a little bit longer than Jason. Jason, I think, made it through a weekend. So I'd like to kind of get your feedback and on how did your time with Buckeye, Nadine, did that change your perception on how you allocated organs or how you approach that?
Oh yeah, 100%. So, um, after I started with Buckeye, I really slowed down on allocation. So I think before Buckeye, my plan for allocation would always be to notify as many centers as fast as I could, as soon as I could. So I would push out offers basically all the way to national level within like the first 30 minutes of like as fast, literally as fast as I could. I would stock the lists and wait for as soon as that person had a provisional or a code, I was alerting the next center. Um, After Buckeye, I really slowed that down almost immediately. Um, Especially with the addition of the backup button in Unos, which is terrible. Um, I really, really, really slowed down. I don't think I've used that backup button since I worked at Buckeye one single time. Um, because I was being on the other side, like getting those organ offers, getting a backup offer, even getting notified that my patient was on a list when it was, a great heart and that was probably going to be placed in the top 10 sequences. Getting alerted at sequence 400 was such a waste of everyone's time. So it became more real that there was actually a person on the other end getting those offers. And why was I sending an offer when I had 25 centers ahead of them? What was I alerting them for? So it really put into perspective. I think the way that UNOS wants those buttons to be used, it put into perspective that literally no OPOs are using them that way. So I have totally done a turnaround on that. And now I'm only offering, to like 5 centers at a time. I'm waiting until those centers are evaluating. I get now when you offer out lungs from the OPO side that transplant or that the coordinator on the other end who is at this point, a lot of them are Buckeye coordinators. When they're getting that call that they need the time to look through the offer to prepare it the way that the surgeon wants the offer, and then to offer it to the surgeon who then wants to look through it. Like that 30-minute time frame that UNOS has set out is just really not enough time, especially for thoracics. And I've become more in tune to what the centers are looking for. So it didn't just make me a better coordinator for allocation. It actually like made me a better coordinator for everything. I knew what centers were looking for after like having prepared the offers for them for surgeons. So that once I was giving a coordinator an offer, I could tell them exactly what I thought their surgeon might want to hear.
Yeah, and before 2007, we printed off a list and actually went down and physically called each and every person down the list. And you had to spend 30 to 45 minutes to prepare to because you want to get to the point and get to what people want to hear about the heart or the lung. Now with the electronic sharing, which there's a lot of great things about the efficiencies of sharing it electronically. There just it needs to be a little bit more standardization as far as what goes in the highlights, because it's all different. And when I was at the OPO and was using the electronic system to share, I tried to put things in the highlights that I'm going to try to answer your questions before you ask them, because I know what you're going to ask. So I'm going to put it all in here to prevent a phone call back, the back and forth. You look at the attachments, what they're named, what gets put in the attachments, can be different. And you might have, 20 or 30 attachments with 4 to 5 pages. and then you get told, you have 30 minutes. I mean, just last night I was on call, and I won't name the OPO that called, but I mean, right from the get-go, they say, you're primary for this organ, and you have 30 minutes, or I'm going to bypass you. And that's how the conversation begins. And I feel like, when we were talking to each other on the phone more, we actually got to know the coordinators. You spoke to so and so frequently, you start to kind of develop that relationship. So I think some of the relationships, with the less communication over the phone has suffered. And that's unfortunate. So, there's definitely some things we can do to expedite that, with, making some things standard on what goes in the highlights, what gets put in attachments, how they're named. Jason, how about you? I think you did a 36-hour weekend shift with us. How did that change your life?
Well, I think that for me, it made me realize, like, so a lot of the what I perceive as shortcomings in UNET and the way it presents data. I have a difficult time extrapolating the data, the way that it's presented, and then feeling confident in my mind that I know what's going on with this donor. And I think that was a lot of my problems. And you had mentioned this, and this is something I do as a coordinator now, making sure that I'm very concise about where I'm putting data and how I'm presenting it. Making sure that things that I think are important aren't just buried somewhere, for you to go on a treasure hunt to find.
Well, yeah, that's, and Steph kind of ran into that a few weeks ago, where, we're evaluating an offer, and, not only are you trying to get through the information in as fast as you can, but there's pertinent information that's not in the highlights that is found later, in an attachment. And, the response that we get, well, that's not my problem. It's your job to make sure you look at all the attachments. And again, we do look at the attachments, but when you're getting a threat of a bypass in 30 minutes, then you're trying to, expedite things, and you kind of, rely on the OPO side to kind of let you know, hey, what are those red flags, that we could, put in the highlight section.
I'd like to highlight something that Nadine said about, that working at Buckeye and experiencing that, and still working at the OPO, it made her a better coordinator, because for as long as I've done both, I've said, there's been a disconnect between the OPO and the transplant center. The OPO doesn't know what the transplant center coordinators are doing, and the transplant coordinators don't know what's going on with the OPO. And so because there's, a deficit in the knowledge of both roles, there's also a disconnect between what's going on, and that causes, turmoil between the two. I mean, it's always competing forces rather than working together. And I have felt for a long time that as there's a disconnect, I have always felt that doing both jobs made me a better coordinator. Now I choose to be on the transplant side of things now, and that's where I belong. I found the exact job that's suited for me. But I did enjoy the OPO job, and it made me a better OPO coordinator, knowing what's going on. And I think it makes me a better transplant coordinator because I know what's going on with the OPO.
Something I'd like to bring up about this, one of the things that I teach, and then I talk about frequently with my fellow coordinators, is when we throw around these words like bypass. You're not bypassing a coordinator. I mean, you are on the surface, but you're bypassing a recipient.
Exactly.
And if you always have that mind frame of that, while you may not be speaking to that recipient, when that offer is theirs, it is theirs. They're at home. They have no idea any of this stuff is going on. And all they're probably doing is waking up every single day, praying that phone call comes before they get too sick. And you just have to approach this always with that mind frame, or that, that um, the decisions that you make, you know, could affect somebody.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason, because we're all, at the end of the day, we all have the same mission, to get as many people as we can off the transplant list, and it's just imperative that we all work together to see that happens.
I think that's funny because I say the same thing to all the people who I'm training, that don't be the reason this recipient doesn't get a transplant today. Like, use that bypass so infrequently that, like, 100% don't be the reason this recipient doesn't get that call, because we can't wait a little bit longer.
Or the perspective of, what if the OPO coordinator does bypass somebody that's a status 1 or 2? I mean, they are in the hospital. I mean, Jason, you gave the perspective of, well, they're at home and they're hoping to get a transplant before they're too sick. But OPOs do bypass transplant centers as they're evaluating these very, very sick patients that are in the hospital. I mean, a status 1 or 2 is pretty sick on, if it's a heart balloon pump, possibly an LAS of 80 or 90 on a vent. I mean, those people don't have very long to live and need a transplant. And because the transplant center needs a little bit longer to evaluate, or there's a lot of attachments, maybe now more than ever, maybe they had a positive COVID test at one point, but maybe it's because of the vaccination and they need to consult ID. I mean, maybe all of these things play a part in whether or not they should accept the organ, but they don't have 30 minutes they need longer than 30 minutes to evaluate. And then the OPO bypasses them, but they're a status 1. Those are the people, or they're an LAS of 80 or 90. Those are the people that only have a week to live. And so they've just taken the chance of them being transplanted. That is, I feel that's a very much a disconnect between the two main players in the transplant field, the OPO and the transplant centers, obviously.
Yeah, and especially since every OPO kind of has a different approach to that backup button that Nadine mentioned. Over a 2-week span in April, we had at Buckeye 1,500 offers that came to us that never even became primary. And I also, I don't even think UNOS doesn't even use the backup or the primary button. But when you send these out and you have questions or when the clock starts, I've had coordinators reach out and say, "Hey, I notified you that you were primary 10 minutes ago, and you have 20 minutes to review this information and get back to me." And it's like, well, there's so many unnecessary calls and notifications that come through. Those important updates kind of just get lost in the mix. And I think one of the things, and we've talked about it before, is there has to be a way to differentiate between a backup that has 40 or 50 provisional yeses in front, and a backup that is, hey, you are next in line, or there's one center in front of you type of backup. So those are things that we'll discuss on other podcasts. I was looking at Life Connection numbers, Nadine. 2018 74 donors, 233 organs. In 2019, 93 donors, 310. 2020, 126 donors and 348. And we all know how challenging 2020 was.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so what's going on there at Life Connection that you've seen those spikes?
So several things happened. And I'll just say, like, from my perspective, what I felt like happened, that I came from Gift of Life Michigan, who basically was like every organ, every time. Like, I really got that mindset of every organ, every time, every donor, every time. I spent many nights there exhausting liverless on, 65-year-old DCDs with all their reflexes. So I kind of brought that energy with me and played a small part in expanding our donor pool in at Life Connection. So when I first came to Life Connection, we didn't do Hep C DCDs, um, which was a huge, like everybody in our DSA has Hep C, I think. So that was a huge area where we were losing donors. So I said like, hey, I came from another Region 10 OPO that I know centers in Region 10 are importing. I know centers in Region 10 are exporting these organs and they're getting transplanted. So let's look into that. So that was one of the increases that happened between like 2018. That was an increase that happened in 2019. And then when 2020 came on, we kind of looked like, what were our ODEs? Where were we not performing? Like which organs were we poor performing on? And then we had the addition of a a transplant surgeon that was a lung surgeon who came and kind of revamped our lung recruitment. So a lot of the coordinators, especially ones who didn't come from a medical background, and myself included, were like terrified of making vent changes or anything like that. And then we would also just maybe not, we thought we couldn't like reverse some of the stuff that the hospital did. Sometimes a lot of our patients would come to us that were trauma resuscitated. So they were fluid overloaded. They had pneumonia. They had all this stuff that the hospital had kind of, attempted to treat their injury and kind of put us from an organ standpoint into a tricky spot. So I think we just got more aggressive with that. Our hospital services teams got really aggressive with like starting T4 and antibiotics before Life Connection even took over. So that was like really, really helpful. We stretched out the length of cases. So when I first started, coordinators were doing 24-hour shifts, and our authorization to cross clamp was about 30 hours. That's not a lot of time to turn lungs around. It's not a lot of time to, run T4 for 24 hours and see if the echo is better. So we stretched out our cases. Now we switched the coordinators to 12-hour shifts. And then the cases now go from authorization to cross clamp. It's closer to like 48, 56 hours. So we stretched out the time that we were managing a patient. It gave us that extra time to get the patient right where we wanted before we started allocation, instead of just starting allocation as soon as we had our HLA and serologies back. So I think it was kind of like threefold. We brought in someone to help us with our donor management. We zoned in on what we were doing bad to start to do better. And then we increased our donor pool a lot. Like we just one of the HDS coordinators the students just presented on one of our cases that was a 65-year-old DCD with all her reflexes, hypertension. Her KDPI was like 90. Her arteries were so crunchy we couldn't pump her kidneys, and both of those kidneys got transplanted. So I think that we, in addition to becoming more aggressive with our donors, we also became more aggressive with how we're sharing our organs. So we're reaching out to centers, aggressive centers in Region 10. Like Region 10 has the lowest median meld at transplant at 26, and Cincy is at 23 alone. Like we're calling them, if any organ gets declined in OR, we're sharing it right away to a center within our DSA. Kidneys, if we're getting close to like that 24-hour, we're looking at the list and we're trying to consider, like the center that we serve at UT, they just transplanted a kidney that was like 45 hours old. And that was because we sent the kidney to Chicago. They put it on the pump. It pumped well. They actually damaged the kidney while it was there. Their preservationist damaged it. And then the surgeon decided that they didn't want to use it. The kidney was 22 hours old, and we were going to just discard it because it was damaged and old. And just on a whim, one of the coordinators called our local surgeon and asked would they want it. It was a rare blood type, and he was like, bring it back. Let's see if I can repair it. If I can repair it, I'll use it. So he brought it back. The kidney's like 30 hours old at this point, repairs it, puts it on the pump. They run cross matches and then transplanted it in the morning. So I think just kind of thinking outside of the box on how can we get good organs transplanted has really increased the number of organs we're getting transplanted.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, appreciate everybody. Nadine, Jason, Stephanie, thank you. We'd like to thank our guests today, Nadine, Jason, and Stephanie. Thank you very much. Great conversation. You can find more information out about Buckeye at buckeyetransplant.com, or you can reach out to us at contactus@buckeyetransplant.com. We'll see you guys next time.